Welcome back to the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham. And there are a lot of people who want to be politically active in the world. They see problems that folks are experiencing right now: homelessness and high housing costs, a changing climate, a democracy under threat. And these problems stir something in them. They want to change. They want to help people. But where to start, and how do we do it? Peter Putnam is the author of the new book, Talkin Bout a Revolution. And in Detroit, the Detroit activist and co-founder of the Grace Lee Boggs School explores many ways someone can be revolutionary. We're talking about your wife, Julia.
Absolutely.
So to discuss this now, though, we have Peter here with us. And Peter Putnam, once again, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks, Tia. Great to be here.
Of course. And we want to hear from you if you're listening right now. Do you want to get more involved in politics? Give us a call. Let us know, 313-577-1019, or let us know if you don't want to get more involved in ways that you can find around it. Either way, Peter, in the book, you do define the term, and then you add to the definition in the book as it continues on. So what does it mean to be a revolutionary to you? What's that definition?
Well, today we're in a situation where we can easily just react to things. And I think the key distinction in the book that I try to make throughout is that we have an opportunity to respond. We don't have to react. There's plenty of reaction, but a revolutionary responds. And we respond from our best self. We respond from the values of our best self. We respond with decency and kindness and forgiveness and play and laughter and love. And that's contrary to what we're bombarded with. So revolutionaries respond from our best self. That's what we do.
And who qualifies as a revolutionary, or what are the characteristics of the person who would be considered a revolutionary? You just talked about being our best selves. And when I saw that stand out in the book, I just thought to myself, what is best self? Well, how do we determine what that even is? So let's go into best self first. Like, what does it mean to be your best self?
Well, that's great, because now I get to talk about my wife, Julia.
Yes.
Okay, she talks about being on your square, that she's a principal at the Boggs School, as you mentioned, and to be a principal is a tough job, and you need to be on your square when you're dealing with students, when you're dealing with frustrated sometimes teachers, when you're dealing with anxious parents, being on your square. And if you're on your square, you have access to those values, those revolutionary values that I laid out, and there's many of them. And so once you're there, you have a chance to respond in a way that elevates rather than deflates, that inspires rather than sort of destroys. So, that's what I would say.
Yes. And going back to that, what are some of those characteristics of someone who would be considered a revolutionary? You talked about it. Once again, you go through it in the book, different characteristics and traits that you highlight. So talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, I think, again, it always comes back to that respond. And I think that intuitively, we have the essence of those values in us. And at a time like now that we're struggling because we're not hearing those values often, we need spaces like this, like WDET, to provide an opportunity for people to hear something different, a different value system. And for me, I think acceptance is huge. Apology is really big as a revolutionary value. I'm a parent. We've got 2 kids. They're teenagers, Tia. I've done my best to parent, but I've made mistakes, and I've reacted rather than responded. And that's okay. We're going to do that. We're human. We're going to do that. But we also have the opportunity to then, after the reaction, if not immediately, because sometimes we need some cooling off, little cool down, we can respond and we can apologize. I don't remember adults apologizing to me when I was growing up. You're shaking your head too.
No, Peter, I was getting into it because we talked a little bit last week, actually. And that's one of the things that often I experience with my parents. They apologize to me growing up for little things, nothing big, but little things. They would say, "Oh, sorry for this," or "Didn't mean for that to happen." Just to reassure me that, we all make mistakes. So let's just go into that a little bit and dig deeper into why that's such an important trait to have as a revolutionary, is to be comfortable with apologizing.
Yeah, it's a tough one because we want to be right, and we can make a decision rather than be right. Maybe we can just be loving and accepting. But there's a strong push for certainty and righteousness, and we need to, as best we can, resist that and respond. It's easy to go off. It's harder to sort of cool down and speak your real truth when you're in a better place.
And I just, going back to that once again with my parents, just when I experienced it, or coming back after a heated moment and having that touch base and apologizing and getting back to a good space, it's something that you don't realize is an important aspect of your life growing up until it actually is something that you have to do as an adult, or now as I'm working every single day. You got to learn how to apologize and take one on the chin every once in a while.
Absolutely. And I know we talked about your parents, and I know your dad's listening.
Oh, yeah, he is.
And so you sound like you had exceptional parents, and I think that's a key component to parent. We're not always right.
Yeah.
Our kids, and the kids are the revolutionary future, and we want to instill the values that we're talking about, those revolutionary best self values in our kids. We want our kids, or at least I want my kids, to be best self revolutionaries. And that's what they're trying to do at the Boggs School, and that's what we need to build a different society from that basis of best self values.
I love that. And when people think of revolutionary activists, there are a number of words that come to mind: fighter, defender, defeater. Violence is sometimes associated with revolutionaries, and you write about it in your book in depth and in detail about the old school versus the new school. So it does seem very different from a revolutionary person you're describing here. So let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I started out, my history is as an old school revolutionary. I was a revolutionary Trotskyist, revolutionary communist from my 25 to 33-year-old self. And I love that. And it gave me a sense of what we needed to do. It gave me purpose. I learned so much in those 8 years. And yet I knew that there was something missing, and that we weren't always in touch with those revolutionary values. And we were so committed to bringing about revolutionary change, and we were so maybe self-righteous, and that crept in, the certainty. But I still believe a lot of those ideas. I still think that we're suffering through a system that's a profit-based system that puts profit ahead of people, and we have to deal with that, and we're going to have to find a way to confront that. But we have to confront it with our best selves. And we have to keep coming back to that, even when the urgency of the moment says, no, I've got to do this, or I've got to push too hard, or we've got to really push against something. I think that's another time, like with apology, that we need to step back a little bit and sort of say, relocate our value system before we go forward, and do what we have to do. Protest. I love protest. I've taken over a couple of buildings in my life. I've marched many times in Washington and just recently in Detroit. So that's cool. But where are we as we're participating in those actions? Where is our heart? Where is our soul? This is a time, Grace Lee Boggs says, now is a time to grow our souls. And we do that by responding even in the midst of protesting.
And we're actually going to get back to that, because that's one of the quotes that I wanted to get into that stood out to me as well is the one from Grace Lee Boggs. But I do want to stay there for a moment and touch on the comparison or differences that you're seeing right now, because in the book, you says 1985 is a time when you're really starting to see you get that fire in your spirit
yes.
to hit the ground and and really make a change. What are you seeing about now and then? So then was the Reagan administration. Mm-hmm. Today we have the Trump administration, and both have stirred you to take action. But you've taken action in a different way this time versus you would have in 1985. So what's the difference here? Is it just you being wiser and understanding differently how to approach it? What's the difference in what's the same?
Great question. Just quickly in terms of Ronald Reagan, I have a piece in the book called Ronnie Made Me a Commie. He didn't answer my letters. I wrote him 2 letters about nuclear weapons. We have to get rid of them, Mr. President. And I never heard from him. And that started me on a road to radicalization that ended up in sort of being that revolutionary communist for those 8 years. So I think the difference is, well, Grace Lee Boggs is one of the reasons that I'm a different person. And we can talk about that. But again, also my wife, and watching what she's done at the Boggs School with Amanda Rossman, one of the co-founders with Julia, to see that relationships were so central, and community. We didn't understand, I don't think, as an old school revolutionary versus what I call a best self revolutionary. We we were trying to build something. We were trying to build a party, right? And parties are nice. I like parties, but it's different from community. And it takes a special skill to do that. And it's taken me a long time to even begin to appreciate that. And I watched my wife do it, and to rely on her critical connections and her relationships to move forward. And from that, you've got a real, because community is we're trying to build ourselves, our best self, as well as bring that best self into a beloved community. And if we do that, we can move forward. Where that will go, I don't know exactly, but I know that's the basis. That's the starting point. Ourselves, a community of other best self revolutionaries, and we got a shot at really changing this world.
You're listening to The Metro. I'm Tia Graham. Our guest is Peter Putnam, author of the new book, Talkin Bout a Revolution, Growing Our Souls in the Time of Trump. And we're discussing what is revolutionary, who's a revolutionary, and how it manifests today. And we do want to hear from you. Do you want to get more involved in politics? Or maybe you don't want to get more involved. Maybe you want to get more involved in community. Call us. Let us know. The number is 313-577-1019. Now, Peter, you've mentioned Grace Lee Boggs a few times. Of course, your wife is a co-founder of the Grace Lee Boggs School here in Detroit. Who was Grace Lee Boggs, and why was she a revolutionary?
Wow. After I left that revolution organization in 1993, I was lost and depressed and didn't know where to go. I read an interview with both Grace and her late husband, Jimmy Boggs. Yes. Mm-hmm. Did you know Jimmy?
No, I did not, but just reading up on them, they were amazing people.
Amazing love and struggle for many years together. And I read this interview, and I saw that community aspect struck me, and I thought, I don't know what to do right now. I'm confused. I'm not sure where I am in terms of this political future for me. And so I looked Grace up in the phone book, and I called her, and she was 77, 78 at the time, and she says, "You've got to come over." So I went over to 3061 Field Street, rang the doorbell. This light-built Asian woman opened the door and invited me in, and instantly rolled out and showed me a video of Jimmy, who had, as I found out, and it just hit me hard, had just died several weeks before my visit. And we talked, and she said at the end of it, "Well, you've got to work with the Detroit Summer." And Jimmy and Grace had started Detroit Summer the year before his death. And I said, when Grace said something like that, you kind of had to do it. She was slight, but she was strong and clear. And so I did. And eventually, in fact, that's how I met Julia, through Detroit Summer. She was the first volunteer there, and was later running the program when I met her. And so between Grace and Julia and Detroit Summer and, there's other things. Carl Jung, we can talk about some other influences. But I came around to understanding that I had to deepen myself, I think. I had to deepen. It wasn't just about ideology. That was important, but it wasn't enough. And so I had to deepen myself.
And there's so many questions I have out of that, because now I'm wondering, I hear when the revolution begun for you, 1985, maybe a little bit before then, but that's when it started to really solidify for you at that time. 25 to 33, you were hardcore at
Yes.
it. And I do want to talk about just that portion of I guess not necessarily giving up, but what it felt like to you was giving up at that time when you had to take a step back. It was burnout. You were tired. You were really going through a lot, personally, mentally, physically, possibly. So, just talk about what it felt like in your mind, thinking that you were giving up, and then you found Grace, and then you find Julia and this community.
It felt like a divorce. It felt like a divorce. I felt like I'd been married for 8 years to something that made so much sense, and organized my life, not just my day, certainly my day, organized my life in a way that was purposeful and powerful and aimed at the future in some kind of, it was we men have a real thing about legacy, and it felt like this is my legacy, and I figured I was going to be a revolutionary. We called ourselves professional revolutionary, but nobody was paying us. I figured I felt deeply then that this is my life. This is what I was going to do. This is my calling. And so when that's snatched out from under you, or it wasn't, I made a conscious decision. I had to leave for various reasons. So I felt like I had done justice to my leaving, but now where do I go? And I suspect a lot of people today are feeling that. Like, what do I do? Where do I go? And I think that's why the simple idea, which isn't so simple when you break it down, of just revolutionaries respond, and we can do that. We're doing it right now, you and I here as we're talking. And we can do it when we meet people in the street. We can do it when somebody's waiting on us at a restaurant. It's always present for us. And we get a chance to be revolutionaries many, many times a day as parents, as teachers, in our workplaces. And that grows something. That grows our soul. And again, I don't know how it all ends. I don't know where it necessarily leads to, but it's a wonderful place to begin and a strong place to begin. And if we start there, again, we have a chance of finding other souls, other soul-growing folk, and we move forward from there.
And we can grow from there. And I do want to talk more broadly about what exactly you're thinking about when you talk about revolutionaries. We're talking about Grace Lee Boggs. She's a local revolutionary here, local activist here in the city of Detroit. And I imagine that maybe even Martin Luther King Jr. is someone that you think of. Malcolm X may come to mind as well. But all of these people are on the left side of the spectrum. They're on this side of it. They're on a totally different side. Do you think that Tea Party activists from the 2000s or other right-wing activists are also revolutionary, even though you may not agree with what they're doing at that moment?
Wow, that's a great one. I would say everybody has the potential to be revolutionary because I believe that we have that intrinsic soul, that heart, those values are there. I think accessing those on a day-to-day basis, living those values is another thing. And I think it's difficult for some people, whether they're right or left. I don't think as a left-wing revolutionary I was always acting from my best self. I think that we have to put those values out into the world in a way, and we can't just claim to be Christians or claim to be holy or claim to be sacred or claim to be right. I think that the proof is in our actions, and so it's tricky. Yeah, I think anybody can become one, but they have to show it to the world, and that's where maybe sometimes the right wing, from my perspective, I don't see it or feel it.
And, it's so interesting. Once again, it's something that I was really interested in talking to you about was that particular point there was both sides think they're right. Both people are screaming and yelling and they're both right in their mind. Mm-hmm. Yet someone's not right in this situation. Something's not going to happen for one of the two folks who are screaming at the top of their lungs. So can we talk about how folks who are in that current situation may find their best selves? How do you navigate that to try to find your best self, even though you're doing something that you think is right?
I think it starts with recognizing that you're reacting. If you're putting your values in the face of people, and with that certainty and that righteousness, there's no opportunity for dialogue. There's no opportunity to respond. And so you have to do what you have to do if you're a teacher or a parent or somebody cuts you off in the middle, as you're driving. You have to find a way to step back from that and realize that they can't be their best self if you're not your best self. And maybe when you're your best self, they still can't be their best self. But you have no opportunity. You have control of your own sort of situation, your own choice. You can always choose to respond, as difficult as that might be. You can always choose to listen rather than to assert. But it's difficult. It's a practice. That word comes back to me when I was writing this book. I never thought I'd think about revolution as a practice, but it really is, in the way that you might have a meditative practice. Or my wife talks about if you want to have a 16-year-old be kind, you teach him what kindness is at 6 and give him 10 years of practice. And we need that practice. We need to build up our response muscles. We need to do response reps of some sort. Yeah. And then we have a chance in those situations where we were maybe at conflict with somebody else and reacting and reactive to, being reactionaries, regardless of our politics. Reactionary is more than just versus progressive. Progressives can be reactionary. Revolutionaries of the old ilk can be reactionary. I know I was at certain points. But we have the opportunity in every moment to step back and respond.
Now, Peter, before we go to a quick break, because we're going to continue our conversation onwards, I definitely want to get into talking to you a little bit more about the science of it all and talk a little bit more about Carl Jung as well and what he meant to you in terms of revolution. But talking about Grace Lee Boggs and the things that she was fighting for here in the city of Detroit, why did it resonate so much with you, especially when you got that phone book out? You looked her name up in the phone book, which most people don't even know what the Yellow Pages is, but went through the phone book, found her name. What was that moment like for you once again when you were able to just break free out of this idea that I am no longer this revolutionary act, but you actually are?
Yeah, it wasn't immediate. I wish it were. It didn't happen immediately. I think Grace, literally, her front door was my door into that. And to enter her room, which had been frequented by all sorts of folk, Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee and all sorts of revolutionary leadership and folks trying to change the world. And Jimmy was a force as well. And so that was sacred space, and I could feel that. She sat me down in it's a living room, but there's books all over the place, and you always leave Grace's house with books. But you could feel the history there. You could feel that there's something that's happened in this room, and there's something that I can take from this. It didn't turn me overnight. It wasn't a conversion in that sense, but it opened a door. And then, there was a lot of other things I had to deal with, including what maybe we'll talk to after the break. I mean, just where I was psychologically, what I had to deal with psychologically.
Yes. And right now, if you're listening to the Metro, we're speaking with Peter Putnam. He's an activist and co-founder, and his wife is the co-founder of the Grace Lee Boggs School. He's also the author of the new book, Talkin Bout a Revolution. Peter, we're going to have you right back after this break. You all stay right there. Back to the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham. And our guest is Peter Putnam. He is the author of a new book, Talking About a Revolution. And, we're talking about a revolution in a time of Trump, because that's what you actually write. That's part of the title of the book. So I do want to bring in the Trump effect that we're seeing right now. President Trump's traits have led to revolutions in different actions. Let's first talk about the folks who want to take his power away. We talked about that a little bit, but there are characteristics that you present within the book that highlight some of the things that we're seeing right now. Can you talk about them?
Yeah, we've talked about our best self and being our best self. And I think there's also, in all of us, a beast self. And that's a reactionary set of values. And that's the hate and revenge and jealousy and pettiness and deceitfulness, and you can tap into that too, and we all have. It's not just Trump that he just that seems to be his default. That seems to be where he goes. His beast self kind of runs his whole being, unfortunately, and it can produce a beast self in us if we're not careful, and because we're always pushing and reacting to that rather than responding with our best self. He sort of seduces us with his beast self, and we end up not in a place that feels good, physically or politically. So there's reactionary values too, and they're in the air, and they're poisonous, and we need to be aware of those values, and we need to realize that we're better than that. Our best selves are better than, and I think finally will prevail over our beast values, our beast self. Yeah. Because
I can imagine even now there are folks out there who would not have considered themselves, I guess in your definition of beast in this time right now, they wouldn't see themselves in that light. Yeah. So that's just an interesting way to put it. We do want to get to the phone lines right now. We do want to hear from you all. We have Jessica in Ferndale on the phone right now. Thanks for calling, Jessica. How are you organizing in your community?
Yeah, so it's so great to hear from a caller that cares deeply about the organizing happening in Detroit. So I'm actually a member of the Detroit Democratic Socialists of America, and I think we really strike that balance of giving people a political home that shows people a vision for a future that meets the moment, that's inspiring and compelling, and also builds that community that you said is so important. So I'd really encourage your listeners, if they're inspired by the author, to check out the work we're doing locally. Congresswoman Tlaib is a member. John Conyers was a member for a long time. We have a deep history here in the city, and I hope y'all will check it out. So thank you so much for giving me the time to talk about what moves me in this moment.
Jessica, thank you so much for calling in, because you just moved us. Peter, what is your involvement with politicians or politics, if you have any involvement at all?
You know, at this point, Tia, what I do is I go into a voting booth. I voted even when I was a revolutionary communist, I still voted. I often voted for third parties if I could, or socialist parties. And in the past, because of the sort of horrificness of Trump, I've actually voted Democrat, which was hard for me because I think that both of those parties, for me, represent too much for me the interests of big business and big banks. They're finally profit-based corporations their own way, and so I have trouble doing that. But I have. And people can vote any way they want. They can spend that time to do what that 5 minutes or 10 minutes or longer that it takes to vote. And I encourage people to vote. And I think it's horrible what's happening to the voting rights stuff. And then after that, though, we step out of that booth and we're human beings again, and we're gonna have an interaction with somebody right there in the voting area and down the road and in our homes and in our workplaces. And are we going to be revolutionaries again? Are we going to exhibit values that both parties often don't exhibit, at least in my experience, in my opinion? So can we be our revolutionary selves, even despite our parties not always being revolutionary?
Yeah, that's a good question that we all should sit with for a moment. But I do want to transition here just a little bit, because when we talk about revolutionary acts and we talk about revolutionaries, it was beautiful to see that you had time to add in Luigi Mangione and his story. Who allegedly murdered a healthcare executive in public. You write that as a pacifist, you struggled with the action, but you also understood part of it. Why did you struggle with this action, number one? And do you consider Luigi revolutionary, or his act revolutionary?
I did struggle. I think that I don't see how violence can be a sort of a core best self value. It doesn't make sense to me. It's easy for me. I'm a white male, middle class. It's easy for me to sort of hold up the nonviolence flag. But I sort of have recommitted to that as best I can, because I don't think it gets us. Martin Luther King talks about you can murder the murderer, but you can't murder. And we have to deal with that. And in our death penalty, which I think is abhorrent, those aren't best self-revolutionary values. I can't. So, and Luigi Mangione challenged me, though, because I did some sort of, I think I called it moral calculus, some moral math. And I do believe, to be honest, that killing Brian Thompson probably saved some lives. His healthcare company now, with a new CEO, will make decisions that will allow more people, at least for a time being, to have better health care. And because they know they're going to get the scrutiny, at least for a while. And other healthcare institutions will also respond accordingly and maybe allow people more chances for improved health. And I think it'll go beyond that, beyond the healthcare into pharmaceutical, et cetera. So I think if we did moral calculus, one life for probably many lives, you could slide down that moral way, that moral ladder. And I don't want to do that. It's tempting, but I don't think in the long run. And I'm sort of a long run guy.
Yeah.
In the long run, I don't think that's going to work for me, and I don't think it's going to work for us.
Yeah. I think a lot of folks who are within the system or looking at what's happening in our world would probably have similar ideals about it. Murder is a no.
It's a no.
It's a no. But a revolution in that way really woke a lot of folks up. So it's a very, very touchy topic there, Luigi was.
Agreed.
But we are talking about, once again, a time of another Trump presidency, and it kind of stirred you to open up and talk about what's going on and how revolution works and how revolutionaries look and their characteristics look. What does it say about what is going on in our country right now in terms of a fight for power when we have this second Trump presidency? You do write in the book, Mara, Make America Revolutionary Again. What does it all mean today?
Well, to start with, I think it's a great time. I think Trump time is a great time for revolution. It sounds contradictory, but we live in a contradictory world, and I think it's a great time for revolution because we're constantly being inspired or assaulted, depending on your perspective, by other values, reactionary values. And if you listen to Trump or the people around him, and the people who echo him all the way down through our country at this point, your temptation would be to react. And we get plenty of time to react, which means we also have plenty of time to respond. It's a great time to respond. It's a great time, as Grace says, to grow our souls. This is wonderful. This is practice. We have at least 3 years, 10 months, 9 months of practice.
And we're getting down to the wire, so I do want to bring in Grace because you just brought Grace back into the conversation.
She's always there.
Yes. So Grace Lee Boggs, there are so many beautiful things that she talked about. One of the things is the universal power, the universal numbers, the universal connection that revolutions are made up of, that come out of them, and as well the connection there between love and passion and compassion and all those beautiful things that we talk about in terms of being human every single day. So can we talk about Grace Lee Boggs and her teachings and how it's led you to be a revolutionary in your life today?
It's funny. I got to know Grace in 1993, and I didn't have children until 2005, and so Grace saw me as a non-married, non-child guy for over a decade, and I think what was beautiful about Grace is she was always growing. She lived to be 100 years, 100 days, and at least for 98 and a half of them, she was growing, and so I could sense that from the very first time I met her. As clear as she was about stuff, she was an evolver, and she believed that revolutionaries evolve, and she spelled revolution with an R and then sort of the parentheses around it, evolution. So you had R evolution, and that was new to me. That idea that we can evolve. The idea of evolution. She talks about Martin and Malcolm. There's a beautiful piece in her book, The Next American Revolution, that the reason she respected him, and it's the reason I respected Malcolm, she just articulated a lot better than I did, was he evolved, and so did Martin, And I think they were actually moving and were going to meet. And they did literally meet at one point in their lives. But I think their way of looking at the world was beginning to intersect. And that would have been a beautiful thing. And I think she understood that. And she talked about the need for us to evolve. And so she inspired evolution. She was a thinker, but I saw her evolve too. After Jimmy died, I think she came much more into her understanding of her own power as a woman, as an Asian woman. And I think that she was always tickled about my fatherhood. Mm. She would ask me in this really beautiful, curious, impish way that she had, how's fatherhood, And she saw a difference in me that she hadn't seen before. There was something about that was interesting for her, and that was just Grace. She was interested in things, interested in how things, ideas, people evolved.
Evolution. Revolution is evolution, as Grace would say. I love that Peter Putnam is an activist, and his wife is the co-founder of the Grace Lee Boggs School. He is also the author of the new book, Talkin Bout a Revolution.
I like the way you say that.
Yeah. Peter, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. We will have you back anytime.
Oh, I'd love to come back to you. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
This is WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is the Metro. You all stay right there.